The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're on the cusp of 2015, and on January 1st, 2015, 20 states will increase their minimum wages. That also is in addition to the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and a lot of these are automatic adjustments made for inflation. In 9 states, these are inflation adjustments that happen automatically to keep the minimum wage in line with inflation. And we've often talked about how adjusting for inflation, Lewis, today's minimum wage is essentially lower than that of 1968. So these are not even real minimum wage increases in the actual sense.
No, not at all. This is where they should be. I recall working with someone who worked at the same company I worked at. He was there for something like 14 years. And his wage never went up with rises in the minimum wage or, of course, inflation. And it was just crazy that can happen.
In 11 states and D.C., the increase is a result of either legislative action or voter-approved referenda. And then in Delaware and Minnesota, there will be legislative-driven hikes later in the year. New York will raise its minimum wage on December 31st today. 29 states will have federal minimum wages above the federal minimum, or rather, let me say that a different way. 29 states will have minimum wages higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 per hour. The smallest increase to the minimum wage is happening in our old friend, the state of Florida, where, Lewis, 12 cents an hour is what people will get, which means for the average 40-hour work week, you're talking about what, $4.80 extra per week?
Not surprising at all. That's Florida in a nutshell, really. It's too bad.
Massachusetts and Rhode Island will have $9 minimum wages, Vermont and Connecticut at $9.15, Oregon at $9.25, and Washington states will be the highest at $9.47. We'll see what the economic impact is. We hear often from the kind of voodoo supply side economists and those who follow them, typically right-wingers in the U.S., that this that increasing minimum wages will be bad for business. It'll be bad for the economy. But as we saw so specifically in San Francisco and the county surrounding it, that even when it came to fast food, which is one of the areas where we hear that minimum wage increases are most damaging to business, more growth than the rest of the state, than the rest of the country, Lewis, in spite of San Francisco having a very high minimum wage.
So many people just can't look at that, don't believe that it's true. I don't know what the deal is. Perhaps we should have some type of basic economic education in school and make it mandatory so that people understand what's going on here.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this because I took AP economics in high school, and that's where my economics education began. And if I recall correctly, it was pretty supply side oriented. In other words, when there were discussions of price floors, which is the closest thing economically speaking to a minimum wage, the conversation, and this was, something like 11 or 12 years ago at this point, or even 13 years ago, I don't think the conversation really did address the fact that when you're stimulating the lower and middle class, certain price floors can actually have a strong multiplier effect and actually be good for the economy within reason. I don't think that was actually discussed.
I guess we would have the same debate on what works for the economy and what works for the economy in the classroom. I guess we can't win this battle.
We now have another hypothesis about who might have hacked Sony. If you've been following the story around The Interview, a satirical movie about 2 individuals played by James Franco and Seth Rogen sent to kill the leader of North Korea, a guy who looks quite a bit like Kim Jong-un in the movie. The movie was not released after the Sony studio was hacked, and there were threats issued to theaters that show The Interview. Ultimately, it was streamed online for purchase and shown in some small theaters starting around Christmas. And the allegation from the FBI was that North Korea did the original hacking of Sony. However, we had a white hat hacker come on this show, Mark Rogers, and tell us that he doesn't see any evidence to support that claim. And now we are starting to hear the exact same theory from others. FBI agents investigating the Sony Pictures hack were briefed earlier this week by a security firm that says its own research into the hack points not to North Korea, but rather to laid off Sony staff, possibly disgruntled former employees of Sony as the perpetrators. And what's interesting about that, Lewis, is that very early on, there was a little noise from individuals saying, because of the system, Sony's system would have to have been known to the hackers, at least to some extent, the internal architecture of their system. I would go and look at former employees or even current employees, a possible mole within Sony. And now, increasingly, internet security experts are leaning in that direction.
I would like to know why the FBI said, basically with certitude, that North Korea was behind the attack in the first place. I guess this is perfectly possible. Who knows if we'll ever catch them, though?
Well, some security agencies said that the red flag for them, as far as it was North Korea claim from the FBI goes, was that it was a definitive claim, like you said, with such certitude, but it was also made quite quickly. And some of these security firms were saying that if this is really as involved and as professional as we are led to believe, it would be difficult to say with no doubt whatsoever so soon thereafter that North Korea is responsible. I think ultimately we will find out who was responsible here.
I hope so. Unfortunately, I mean, if this is what former employees are stooping to, it's pretty bad. But they had us fooled. They did a great job with their statements.
And the FBI is mostly still standing by their statement, other than the fact that they're saying they're open to hearing from anybody who has more information. The FBI said the FBI has concluded that the government of North Korea is responsible for the theft and destruction of data on the network of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Attribution to North Korea is based on intelligence from the FBI, the U.S. intelligence community, Department of Homeland Security, foreign partners, and the private sector. There is no credible information to indicate that any other individual is responsible for this cyber incident. Maybe the FBI just got this one wrong. We will see.
Well, it wouldn't be the first thing the FBI got wrong, would it?
No, it would not be the first thing. We will see ultimately what happens. And so many people are very engaged with this, emailing me saying, David, you really have to consider this possibility. You're ignoring this piece of evidence. So I think there's a lot of people very interested in seeing who it actually was that conducted this hacking. I told you yesterday, or the day before, that in spite of being a convicted felon, Republican Congressman Michael Grimm said that he would not be resigning his seat in Congress. That has now changed. Over the last 24 hours, Michael Grimm has indeed said, quote, "After much thought and prayer, I have made the very difficult decision to step down from Congress effective January 5th, 2015. The decision is made with a heavy heart, as I have enjoyed a very special relationship and closeness with my constituents who I care about deeply." He needed prayer to figure out that it might not be that good of an idea for him as a convicted felon to remain in the House of Representatives, possibly with jail upcoming.
I don't think it had anything to do with prayer. I think it had more to do with his peers telling him that he should probably get out of there because he's making them look bad.
He pled guilty to a felony tax charge. He admitted to failing to report more than $900,000 in revenue from a Manhattan restaurant, Healthalicious, that he owned from 2007 to 2010. He acknowledged lying in a civil case brought by former Healthalicious employees. And it doesn't appear that, we don't know what went on behind the scenes. Publicly, John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, a Republican, didn't call for Michael Grimm's resignation. But we have to assume, Lewis, that there were very serious conversations behind the scenes. And as crazy as Republicans are, as crazy as the current set of Republicans in the House and Senate are, they have some common sense. And I would assume that John Boehner or someone representing Boehner went to Grimm and said, listen, this is not good for the Republican Party. You should really think twice about not resigning.
I think that's usually how it goes in cases like this. They say that it's their own decision and that they thought about it a lot, but no, I don't think so. I mean, most of these politicians have skeletons in their closet, and when they come out, you just got to kick them out.
And they're not that far in the closet when they happen while you're already in office. So those can be the most challenging ones. Now they just have to get rid of Steve Scalise, the guy that was uncovered to have been a guest at a white supremacist convention about 10 years ago that we talked about yesterday. That thing is still ongoing. That may not really lead, though, to a resignation, because there are lots of Republicans who just think, hey, he was there talking about how welfare needs to be reined in, and that's that. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah, he's not part of the group. He just happened to be speaking at one of their events. He's not a convicted felon, so it's a little bit different. We'll see how viral that story goes, though.
We have the last Hatriot Mail of the year with some interesting end-of-year advice. You'll see what I mean next, and then the conclusion to our debate over whether more guns equal less crime.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com, because in a free society, everyone could vote on which theories to believe, and when elite scientists rely on so-called facts, it just proves that they have a liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Kristen Vanderveen. Kristen Vanderveen, thank you for being the last member of the day of 2014. Why not sign up and become member of the day for 2015? Go to davidpakman.com/membership. Help us close out the year strong. And remember that for the last few hours of this year and all through 2015, any Amazon.com shopping that you do, you can use to support the show by first going to our website, davidpakman.com, and clicking on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. It's so simple, people assume they've done it wrong. You click the Amazon banner, and then you shop, and that's it. And Amazon sends us a kickback. It is time for the last Hatriot Mail episode of 2014.
Between waving a Gadsden's flag from a highway overpass to drafting George Zimmerman for a 2016 run, a patriot has little time for anything else. But when that annoying little dweeb, David Pakman, really pushes the liberal envelope beyond what a God-fearing teabagger can bear, there's Hatriot Mail, your brief respite from the unending deluge of liberal bias.
Today's Hatriot Mail, which is the last Hatriot Mail of the year, is very relevant to New Year's Eve, Lewis, because as you know, Lewis, there's this idea that on New Year's Eve, there are many babies conceived who were then born in September. And this, in a way, is an episode of Hatriot Mail that does address that very, very specifically. Let's take a listen.
David, damn, you must have been beaten up in school a lot, and so do I lock forward to the next time you two-faced coward do. Your channel is a f***ing disgrace to humans as a species. Dave, do not reproduce.
So there it is, Lewis. It is advice not to reproduce it this time. And let me allay all fears that I did not plan to reproduce now or anytime soon. So that is not something that this Hatriot needs to be worried about, but maybe something to think about for others, right?
I suppose so. Yeah, this is a nice, short, to the point Hatriot Mail, and a great way to ring in the new year, I think.
Oh, no question about it. Yeah, I mean, I can only assume, ladies and gentlemen, that as President Obama starts to wrap up his second term and we start moving in the direction through 2015 into the primaries and the subsequent November of 2016 election, the Hatriots will become even more fervent and feverish. If only there was some way to kind of combine those two words to explain what I'm talking about, but both fervent and feverish about their dislike for anything progressive, for critical thinking, for anything that is not blind following of either religious or libertarian doctrine. It's going to be an interesting couple of years, isn't it?
I'm looking forward to more hate. I can't get enough of it, and I think the best is yet to come.
We will see Hatriot Mail again in 2015. We will take a break. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman, and give us a like on Facebook while you're at it, facebook.com/David Pakman Show, closing in on 35,000 Facebook likes.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We are still speaking with John Lott and Evan DeFilippis. Let me go back to Dr. Lott on this point and see if we can. We're going to have to at some point agree to disagree, but Dr. Lott, let me allow you to respond directly to two specific claims. One, that some of the studies you cite do specifically show a correlation between more guns and more aggravated assault. You said you wanted to explain that. And number two, the claim that Evan made that some of the studies you cite have since been kind of retracted by the authors.
Okay. Well, first of all, the study, I mean, I'm happy to address the other assault issue too, but the point he was making was with regard to the Carl Moody and Marvel paper. And the point that's there is they're looking at essentially Ayers and Donohue's, the other authors' model, and they're fitting a straight line to what's curved data. When you look at things on a year-to-year basis, there's no increase that suddenly occurs right after concealed carry laws are passed. It's simply an artifact of fitting a straight line to data that's curved. So the line lies above the curve to begin with, lies below it in the middle, and lies above it again at the end. And what they point out is that fitting that straight line artificially makes it look like there's a temporary increase, but there's really no increase that occurs there. That's the point that they were making. Now, so far as our authors backing away from the studies, the one that I've seen you mentioning is by Michael Maltz, who ended up doing work with David Olson, who's at the University of Chicago at University of Illinois at Chicago. And what happened in that case is that Olson still agrees with it. Maltz later did another paper where he says that county-level data, you can't use that for looking at crime rates. Well, their paper was on state-level data, so I don't even see what the point is. Can you explain to me what the point is of saying that county-level data is not reliable? But in any case, my work looked at city-level data, which they didn't say that there was a problem with, county-level data, and state-level data, and essentially you get the same results across all those different types of things. Now, with regard to the issue of aggravated assaults, there's one paper that's been published out of all the 4 dozen or so papers that have been published now on this issue that claims to find a small temporary increase in aggravated assaults. But, again, it's this issue of putting a straight line to data that's not straight. And so you can get these things where it temporarily goes above this line or not, even though the general pattern is going down. And so that explains basically that point there too.
Sure. It just sounds like you're no longer making this argument that the definitive and ambitious claim that more guns lead to less crime when you're citing studies in which there's disagreements in the authors, there's problems statistically, there's complex conclusions. It just doesn't seem nearly as definitive as you're making it out to be.
I've always, if you listen to me talk in the media or whatever, listen to stuff I write up, what I do is, in fact, even many of my op-eds, when I'm allowed to put in links, I put in a link to the list of studies. People can go and see the studies. They can see the ones that find a benefit. They can see the ones that claim that there's no effect. And so people can draw their own conclusions. But the point is, look, I don't know how much you're familiar with academic debates on things, but if you look at almost anything, minimum wage laws, anything, you're going to find people on both sides of an issue. A lot of people on both sides of the issue. This debate is extremely unusual in the sense that you take murder. How many published studies can you point to on concealed carry that find a bad effect on murder rates? Zero. There's not one. how many? So the entire debate in terms of murder is in terms of how much of a benefit there is.
Maybe we could talk. I did want you to respond to this one point that Dr. John Donahue took precisely your same data, using your same methodology, extended it almost a decade in terms of new data, and he additionally corrected some of key flaws that the National Research Council had. For example, the panel failed to include proper criminal justice controls. They didn't have clustered standard errors, which is now common practice, as you know, among econometricians. When correcting these errors, which is accepted by the academic community as substantial errors, he found that any of the ambiguity in the NRC's results vanish, and instead the clear evidence is that right-to-carry laws increase crime and aggravated assaults.
Yeah. Look, and I know the paper you're talking about.
Responses to that, given that this is clearly a study that you simply just don't mention as.
Well, you haven't read the debate on that paper after it was published. There's huge data errors in the Donahue paper.
9,000-word column on the debate on that subject. So
okay, well then the paper with Moody and others that goes and shows, for example, they have one county that they have in 76 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, that Moody paper in Table 3 shows the direct opposite of what you're claiming.
No, for aggravated assaults, but the problem is when you take out the data errors, there's no reason why one county should be in there 76 times in their data set. They get many states off by a decade or more in terms of the laws, even from what they say in their own paper, coding errors. When you fix those types of coding errors, the result for aggravated assault goes away.
Yeah, well, that's just simply not the case.
What do you mean it's not the case? Go and contact Carl Moody or some other academics who are involved with that, Paul Zimmerman or others, and just see whether or not they have those types of mistakes in there, like a county being in there 76 times.
Let me pause here because I do want to get to one other issue, which I know we wanted to talk about, and I believe that we may not necessarily get agreement if we continue focusing on this point. You have talked, Mr. Lott, about how the vast majority of what you characterize as mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. Tell us a little bit about that so we can talk about this a bit.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you look at all the mass public shootings in the United States since at least 1950, with two exceptions, or all the ones in Europe, what you find is a consistent pattern is that these criminals keep on picking small areas where they're allowed to go and attack where victims can't defend themselves. So you see things like the Batman movie theater shooting, where you have 7 movie theaters within a 20-minute drive of the killer's apartment there. Only one of those movie theaters posted a sign banning permanent concealed handguns. The killer didn't go to the movie theater that was closest to his home, didn't go to the one that had the largest auditoriums. He went to the only one that made it so that victims couldn't defend themselves. And you see this happen time after time. You know, I know, you have Mother Jones out there, which will go and claim that there's no mass shooting has been stopped by citizens with permanent concealed handguns. The thing is, the fact that the citizens there stops it quickly. What Bill Landis at the University of Chicago and I have shown is that if you look at these mass public shootings, Bill and I looked at all the mass public shootings from 1977 through 1999, is that the one big factor that determines how many people get killed or injured at these attacks is the amount of time that elapses between when the attack starts and when someone is able to go and get there on the scene with the gun. But there's tons of errors in the Mother Jones study. You don't need to rely on me. There's Dwayne Grant, who is well known for his work on mass public shootings. He had put up something at Reason magazine pointing to the number of early cases that Mother Jones missed. You have James Fox, who disagrees with me on almost everything else, except for the data errors in the Mother Jones things. James Fox is a liberal Democrat, strong proponent of gun control. He's at Northeastern University. He's someone who deals extensively with this type of gun data, and yet he has pummeled Mother Jones for not using consistent definitions, how they put in some things that are inconsistent with other cases that they exclude.
Okay, but let's pause. Let's pause on. I want to pause the focus on Mother Jones, because really we want to talk. Aside from what Mother Jones says, let's hear what Evan has to say for a second.
I mean, I'm not citing Mother Jones, and I have no intention to. The fact of the matter is that the majority of incidences where mass shootings occur, they occur in places where people have been harmed, where there's a particular emotional grievance. Because a person just simply spends the majority of their time either in school or work, the majority of shootings happen at school or work, which happens to be gun-free zones. I mean, they're not selecting these places in order to maximize death count. They are selecting these places because it is an area for which they were emotionally attacked, or they felt that they were abused, and they're responding to that. If shooters are so pathologically preoccupied with maximizing deaths, they should be flying over to Australia where there's a gun ban and shooting there. But the fact of the matter is that these people are choosing the places not because of any kind of strategic hyper-rational calculation, which is simply naive, but because there's an emotional attachment to these locations, and it just happens to be the case that these places are also gun-free zones. And I wanted to challenge this idea.
Lots of businesses are not gun-free zones.
I having these 5 minutes to talk, so if you could lend me the same courtesy.
I'm just trying to make it more efficient by just letting you respond to what the point will be.
Great. So when John says he makes this contention that there's almost no attacks. Almost every single attack has occurred in a gun-free zone. Let's sort of unpackage that and see what he means by this. First, to be clear, there was an Everytown study on this subject. They found that there have been at least 16 mass shootings that have occurred entirely in places where guns are not banned. Second, just to give some examples of how John Lott operationalizes this phrase gun ban, let's take the case of, I believe it was Hialeah, Florida. In 2010, there was a mass shooting there where 4 more people were killed. This was a small restaurant. You can see in images from Yelp reviews, for example, that the restaurant has a bar area, and then there's a main portion where meals are served. Dr. Lott claims that this place is a gun-free zone because permit holders aren't allowed in restaurants whose primary business is serving alcohol. However, in cases where restaurants have bars, Florida law suggests that permit holders should avoid the bar area, but they can carry everywhere else in the restaurant. But John just asserts that this place is a gun-free zone because of the Florida restriction on having guns in bars. And he makes this sort of argument in multiple instances where there's not any clear evidence that it's a gun-free zone, and he just asserts that that's the case.
I called up the restaurant immediately after the attack. I talked to them. I asked them what the rules were for their particular restaurant there. They serve alcohol beverages all over the place in there. There's not a clear delineation, as I recall, but you can go look at my website because I have a discussion on there when I called them up at the time. And, these studies, Bloomberg's groups, don't call up these places. They don't find out what the policy was at that place. They don't find out whether the bar was actually separate from the rest of the restaurant, for example.
John, I would be interested in hearing you respond to what I think is the most pertinent thing raised here by Evan, which is, even if you can show a correlation, have you demonstrated that there's a causal relationship between shooters choosing gun-free zones because they are such?
Well, look, you can look over time, all right? And what you find is that the states that are right to carry, and many of them, 98, 99% of the state, you're able to go and carry your permanent concealed handgun. These attacks, to the extent that they still occur in tiny areas within the state. If these were random, then it should be 98, 99% of the time you should see these mass public shootings. Evan mentions businesses. Well, where these attacks occur. You have businesses that are gun-free zones, and you have businesses that allow people to carry. Why is it that you don't see attacks occurring in these places where they allow people to carry in those types of businesses? Is it just random that happens all the time? And and you saw the work that I did with Bill Landis when we looked at these mass public shootings over a couple decades. We found that when states pass permit concealed carry laws, You saw about a 40% drop in mass public shootings immediately after the laws got passed, and that to the extent to which the attacks occurred, they occurred in these tiny areas. They started changing where they occurred and started occurring only within these tiny areas within the state where permanent concealed handguns weren't allowed. Before, they were occurring in all sorts of other businesses.
Okay,
Now
so
they're
let's let Evan respond to that, because we are running shorter on time, and I want to make sure that has he addressed, Evan, has John addressed the issue of correlation versus causation in your mind?
No, not in my mind. I mean, this question has been investigated previously. The fact of the matter is when you examine the motivation behind the attackers, you can either look at letters they've left behind, arguments that they've had, with friends. When you examine the motivation behind their arguments, they are saying that they're not motivated by media glory. They're not motivated in an effort to maximize kill count. It's just such a vapid notion that criminals are these hyper-rational agents that can undergo this process of Bayesian updating, where they have a sense of the number of concealed carry owners in a particular region, and they strategically alter their location based upon national numbers. Like this just doesn't work. Maybe this is how economists think about the issue, but it's not how criminologists think about the issue, and it's not how it plays out in reality. The fact of the matter is that it is a snap event that occurs due to some psychological trauma, and they target people that they know in an area. And this is the consistent case throughout the mass shootings that we're looking at. And if motivation matters so much, we should examine this recent FBI report on active shooter incidents since 2000. This is situations in which the shooter is in public trying to inflict casualties. The evidence doesn't get any better for in terms of examining this issue. Of the 160 incidences the FBI catalogs, only 1 was stopped with an armed citizen with a gun. 5 were stopped by security guards, and 20 more were stopped by unarmed civilians, which just shows how effective good guys with guns are. And Lott is going to say, well, of course they weren't stopped by armed citizens, because the fact of the matter is all of these concealed carry people deterred the shooting from ever happening. But there's no evidence that this is how motivation works. There's no evidence that criminals can actually internalize the fact that there is a dense area of...
Well, you just have to look at this year.
Change their risk perception based upon that fact. He's just assertion.
Time after time, you see evidence left by these killers that they're taking this into account. I'll just give you 2 examples from this year. Look at the Santa Barbara killer. If you read his manifesto, he explicitly talked about why he picked the venue he did to do the attack based on whether there would be guns there to stop him. You look at the Canadian Moncton shooter that was there.
Right.
On his Facebook page, he had 6 comics posted about gun-free zones, making fun of the fact that victims were saying you can't have a gun here before the killer ends up killing them. And you see this time after time. But look, the evidence with regard to concealed carry and crime rates generally, it's much easier in a broader sense there to go and deal with the causality issue, because you have so many different types of tests. And I try to go through these at the beginning. You see the percentage of the population with permits, how it changes over time. The ones that have the most permit have the biggest drops. You see differences across different types of crime rates. You see geographic differences. There's several other differences that I could mention. People can go and look them up on crimeresearch.org or in my book. But the point is, you have so many different types of qualitative evidence. It's very hard, and I'm explicit about this in More Guns, Less Crime, it's very hard to come up with an alternative explanation that could explain all these different results. None of the studies, even the ones that Evan was talking about that find no effect look at just one type of evidence. They don't look at all these other types of evidence. Why do you think that's the case?
All right, and Evan, I will let you answer that question, and we'll give you the last word. John Lott had the first word here, and I will let you address that question as we wrap up.
Sure. The fact of the matter is that, and I mentioned this before, that Lott is the one that's making the claim, the extraordinary claim that more guns produce less crime. And throughout this discussion, he's hedging his bets. he's no longer making offensive arguments as to how more guns lead to less crime, but as to how the conclusion from the National Research Council was that there is no conclusion. That's different than the original argument that he was making, which requires extraordinary evidence. The fact of the matter is that econometrics, especially of the level of sophistication and complexity that Dr. Lott participates in, it requires a tremendous amount of trust. It requires, not only because it's largely inaccessible to the public, but also because there's just a lot of uncertainty about what goes on in econometric models. And the fact of the matter is, it's just that Lott is not deserving of the trust of the audience. He has a storied history of academic dishonesty where he's fabricated large surveys. He invented a sock puppet to worship at his own. He regularly invents fake statistics to further his cause. And we demonstrated in this discussion that he cherry picks data to support his claim. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's not nearly as clear cut.
I report the entire studies that people can look at. I use all the data, and I go through my surveys. I list out the data, the different studies. Other people have done surveys too. Okay. If you want to go and point to another published academic survey, fine. I'd be interested in hearing about it. But the thing is, that no matter how you cut this, the vast majority of academics find a benefit. The debate is, unlike almost all other academic debates, the debate is over how large the benefit is. You have maybe 30% who claims that there's no effect, and the other 70% that claim that there's a benefit. Maybe 62% if you want to include non-national studies that pick some small area to go and look at. But, you know, if you want to get into these personal attacks, which you know are inaccurate, then we should go and have a show on those. But I don't really see the point of doing that. Look, because you don't need to rely on me. There's lots of other academics that one can look at. And you can go to crimeresearch.org. You can go to other places to go and look at an entire list and not a cherry-picked list of studies that are there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that we're going to be on an impasse in this subject. If anyone is interested, we have a list of studies that were strategically excluded from the cherry-picked sample on armedwithreason.com, and I guess we could just let audience members decide.
My book, More Guns, Less Crime, goes through all those studies that you mentioned. Okay?
All right, we are going to have to leave it there.
That I ignore those studies, or cherry picking would be that I ignored them, that I didn't talk about them, right? So
Sure.
if I go through and actually go and talk about the studies, how is that cherry picking?
Well, first there's at least 7 studies not included in the list, which I can simply rattle off. And second, of the ones that you do study, the ones that you do examine, you either misinterpret or don't give equal weight to. You give equal weight to all claims when not all studies are created equal.
All right, we are going to have to pause there. I want to remind the audience we've been speaking with John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and Evan DeFilippis, co-founder of Armed with Reason. There is, of course, more to talk about. Both of you are welcome to be back on the program anytime. I think it will be a very interesting conversation for our audience, and I can't thank you both enough for being on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Happy New Year.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
2 men shot up a Walmart with BB guns and somehow did not get shot by police. This is 2 men in Idaho who were taken into custody after shooting up a Walmart with a BB gun, according to the Coeur d'Alene Press. Users of social media have claimed that the arrest of the 2 men, who were not identified, is in stark contrast to the incident at an Ohio Walmart in August involving an African-American man, John Crawford, who was left dead after police shot him while he stood in an aisle holding a BB gun that he had removed from a shelf. And according to the Idaho police, the 2 intoxicated men, who happened to be white in this case, walked into the Post Falls Walmart, removed BB guns from boxes before loading one and firing it 4 times in the store. Walmart store security contacted police, said there's 2 men here who are shooting guns in the store, and they're saying they're going to shoot the store up. Police arrived, and the individuals were not shot by police. Every situation is different, but we have time and time again these parallel stories where the most glaring distinguishing factor seems to be the race of the accused perpetrator. In this case, we had an active shooter situation. Walmart security call police and say, we've got 2 guys in here. They're both making threats about shooting, and they're shooting. And somehow they don't get shot, Lewis. Yet John Crawford in the Ohio Walmart ends up getting shot dead. They all had BB guns. John Crawford wasn't even shooting his.
You know, I can see something happening where the police show up, and since it was the store that called and the store was alerted to this, perhaps someone said they're BB guns, or perhaps someone alerted the cops beforehand. And in the other situation, it was a shopper who called the police, and the police really had no idea what was going on. But that's just me, you know, being the devil's advocate here.
And let's take it a step further. I want to assume that let's assume you're mostly right. I'm not trying to argue that these 2 guys should have been shot. What I'm saying is, why was John Crawford shot in that particular case? Because believe me, my way of resolving what we see as an overuse of police force is not to start shooting more white people to even the numbers. That would be a sheer lunacy if that's what I was saying. What I'm saying is, it's clear that these situations can be diffused without shooting the perpetrator. Let's explore making that a more frequent occurrence.
Agreed. I think that I would assume that in both cases, there was not loud gunfire happening because no one had real guns, and the store was not in chaos. People were not fleeing for their lives. Yet for some reason, in one of those cases, police just started shooting before even observing what was happening.
And if you're going to email me and saying that by pulling the race card, I'm somehow race baiting, this idea that now referencing discrepancies based on people's race is a form of racism or race baiting, I'm just going to ignore it. So if that's what you're going to email me about, save yourselves the keystrokes. Maybe, do something else. I don't even know what to tell you. We do have a voicemail number. It's 219-2DavidP. We haven't heard from the Eggman for a little while, but boy, did we hear from him this morning.
Brother Dude Man, you definitely need to get a Roku channel. I will start watching you on TV again if you have a Roku channel. Also, and I have one more point. Oh, yeah, Dave. As a hobby, I sell a lot of cars, right? A long time ago, I sold a shitty old Chevy Blazer with a David Packman sticker on the back. That was my work truck. I use it a lot. I didn't need it anymore, so I sold it. I see it around town all the time. I love seeing a David Packman sticker on another vehicle, even though I know it's a complete hillbilly redneck who would kill any liberal he could see if he knew it. But he had David Packman on his Blazer, so kind of funny. Jokes on him. Shalom, little brother.
All right, so as the Eggman says, he apparently tricked what he describes as a hillbilly redneck when he sold them his truck with a David Packman Show sticker, and there's a hillbilly redneck who, according to the Eggman, would love to kill liberals, who is driving around with a David Packman Show sticker in upstate New York. That's quite a story, Lewis.
It's quite a story. I think that the Eggman may be exaggerating just a little bit, but I'm sure most of what he's saying is accurate. I love hearing from the Eggman. It's been too long.
It has been too long. On today's bonus show, Texas turns a blind eye to pollution. Vladimir Putin acts to protect vodka prices, and an Italian circus paints dogs to look like pandas. All of that and more on today's bonus show. If you're not a member, this is it for the David Pakman Show 2014. But if you subscribe to membership at davidpakman.com/membership, by getting access to the bonus show, there is a little more David Pakman Show yet in 2014. Otherwise, we will talk to you in the new year. What a great year 2014 has been. Thanks to everybody who made this the biggest year yet for the David Pakman Show. But we can't stop yet. We need your support in 2015. Start the year off strong with a membership, davidpakman.com/membership. We really need next year the odd-numbered years before presidential elections are the most important years for growth because we set ourselves up for the big increase in political attention in 2016. So 2015 needs to be big. Be one of our first 2015 members, davidpakman.com/membership. See you on the bonus show or after New Year's.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.